Well, the express train known as the Chinese economy seems to have developed some rattles lately. Workers are going on strike, unheard of in a communist paradise, and the technocrats have wound back their estimates of economic growth, and there's a fair bit of commentary suggesting the commodity boom is looking a bit toppy. To get some insights on it all, I spoke to Dr Edward Tse, who heads up the global consulting firm Booz and Company's Chinese operations, and is also a director at China's biggest steelmaker, Baosteel. Dr Tse, we've seen a lot of stories coming out of China recently about strikes, wage claims, even suicides at one major factory. To what extent is this fundamentally changing what's going on in China? Are we seeing a new form of unionism in China?
Yeah, I think these sort of events that we have seen over the last several weeks, I believe they signify perhaps a bit of a turning point in the Chinese model, whereas in the past, much of China was relying on a low-cost manufacturing and export of the low-cost sort of products to the rest of the world. The labor strikes as well as the suicides as Foxconn, one of the largest contract manufacturers in China, do signify that in fact there's a lot of pressure on the labor side on China, in particular with respect to the labor costs. And we are probably going to see an increase in the labor costs, in particular along the coastal region of China. So,
is that likely to lead to inflation? More inflation than that we've been seeing, and therefore higher interest rates, slowing down of the Chinese economy?
It may lead to a little modest inflation, but it probably won't be very significant. Much of the reasons for labor strikes is because the labor costs in China have been falling behind the commensurate GDP growth in China. So there's a bit of a catching up today. So I don't believe that it's going to lead to a significant increase of inflation because of this reason. It may lead to some modest degree of inflation.
How does what's happening there sit with the theme of your book, The China Strategy, where you talk about the new wave of entrepreneurialism being seen in China? We seem to be seeing a sort of a collectivisation of the workforce at the same time as a new growth of entrepreneurs.
Well, I don't think the two are sort of in contradiction with one another. The entrepreneurism of China is really very dynamic and is really providing the growth of many of the new Chinese companies. And in fact, today, many of the most successful Chinese companies are actually privately owned by the entrepreneurs. I believe that the entrepreneurism in China will continue to be one of the major underpin for the continuous growth of China.
But how does that sit with what is obviously the case, which is that it's still a one-party state where the companies are generally owned by the government? I mean, isn't what you're talking about going to fundamentally conflict eventually with the political system in China?
Well, actually, paradoxically, it's not. Yes, it is a one-party system, and many of the enterprises in China are state-owned. But at the same time, the Chinese government, i.e. the Chinese Communist Party, has made it very clear that for many sectors, they would allow the private sectors to be involved, both privately owned Chinese companies as well as foreign invested companies. So, for those sectors, there's ample room for the entrepreneurial companies of Chinese to continue to grow and to blossom.
And there does seem to be a shift in the basis of the economy from export to domestic. You're a director of Baosteel, and I guess the question is, to what extent is there demand for resources, for raw materials, which obviously Australia is interested in, now moving from the export sector to urban infrastructure spending, and therefore more stable?
That's right. It is a priority for the Chinese government to make the composition of the GDP to be a much more balanced composition. As you said, so far China has been relying on mostly export of low-cost, products, as well as a fixed asset investment, mostly in infrastructure. The Chinese government recognizes it's important for the GDP to be more towards domestic consumption. And in fact, a key driver for the domestic consumption is going to be the urbanization that's now going on. In addition, the Chinese government is also putting in place social safety nets in the form of pension funds, healthcare, and so on. Hopefully that will incentivize the Chinese to turn some of their current savings into real consumption. So the trend is very clear, and that is a priority for the Chinese government.
But the iron ore spot price has been falling a lot lately. Why is that happening?
Well, part of the, as always, the iron ore or any commodities pricing is a result of supply and demand. Only about 3-4 months ago, China's domestic demand was pretty high on many of the products. For example, automotive. China is now the largest market in the world, and demand continues to be very strong. But the demand, nothing can continue to grow at 50-70% every year. So there's been a bit of a slowdown in some of these sectors, for example, in construction.
What do you think is the outlook for iron ore and coal pricing, given what you can see going on in the economy in China, the demand picture?
I think in the short term, in other words, probably for the next 6 months, there's probably going to be a gradual slowdown of the economy, and hence a bit of a slowdown at the demand side from some of the key sectors of the end usage, for example, automotive and property construction. And that will have implications on the demand for iron ore, and hence my expectation is that perhaps the iron ore pricing may also stabilize a little bit.
Actually fall or just stabilize?
My guess it will probably see a bit of a fall in the next few months.
Obviously there's been some success. The Chinese government has been trying to slow the economy to some extent, and there's been some success in that. The latest GDP was 10.3, down from 11.9.
Right.
Where do you expect to see that stabilising in the long term? Under 10 or over 10?
I think for the rest of this year, 2010, I think we're probably going to see also a tad slowdown for the rest of this year. My expectation is you will probably drop below 10 a little bit, but not substantially below 10. So for the average of this year, probably we're looking at an average of about 10%.
Thanks for joining us, Edward Tse.
Thank you.